European honeymoon, 1977. Gail and I left Kennedy Airport on British Airways the following day on our long-anticipated honeymoon. We boarded a plane at Gatwick and flew to Dublin, staying at the Hotel Hibernia while we perused the city's sights, including a few friendly pubs, though drinking warm Guinness beer wasn't something I could develop a taste for. When we boarded the train for Belfast, I don't think that Gail or myself was ready for the security, slums, and schizophrenia that we found gripped most of the city, with the exception of small enclaves in the Protestant sector, where we stayed in a bed and breakfast for the first night due to the fact that most of the bigger hotels had been bombed out. It blew my mind. British commandos with bomb-sniffing canines hiding in doorways. We had to take a Protestant taxi to get to a checkpoint that separated the Protestants and the Catholic sectors, having to pass ourselves and our luggage through a metal detecting machine before getting a Catholic taxi to our destination on the other side. Distant relatives whom I had never seen lived in the infamous Falls Road area, a notorious IRA stronghold. As Gail and I exited the taxi, we couldn't help but compare it to the South Bronx or even East Berlin, as it must have appeared after the Second World War. We could feel the unseen eyes upon us, but as spoiled Americans, never having been touched by real oppression or war, we were totally ignorant of the deep paranoia of a suffering people. All street names had been removed from display to make it more difficult for their would-be jailers or assassins to find them. A few young men in their late teens eyed us suspiciously, but not with the disrespect or bad intentions one could expect in New York's more downtrodden neighborhoods. Even under the worst conditions, these people managed to retain their sense of morality and fair play, which myself, being a descendant of this land, made me feel a sense of pride and kinship. "Hey, buddy," I called in a friendly manner, leaving Gail about 10 yards back as I approached one of the young men standing out on the street. "Doesn't anybody want to be found around here?" I joked as I stepped in front of them. They looked at me silently. "I'm looking for the Wilsons," I said, offering the address I had written down. The older kid glanced at it briefly and then smiled. "You from New York? Boston?" "New York. The name's Sullivan," I said proudly. "Ah, Sullivan." He nodded. "I know where they live. Follow me," he quipped, leading Gail and I through a maze of alleyways and interconnecting houses that seemed to have no end. The people we met were to prove typical of all the people we met in Ireland. They were warm, friendly, and generous to the point of dismay, sharing the little they had with us while feeling uncomfortable whenever we returned their generosity. We stayed with Tony and Anne and their 3 kids for 5 days on the Black Mountain outside Belfast, where the original Gauls were supposed to have lived. They first migrated from Constantinople and highlands of Europe. They had a sparse summer cabin there. I spent most of the days helping a neighbor take in hay and helping to repair an irrigation ditch that led from further up the mountain. In the evenings, we'd sit around talking and enjoying the antics of the children, a lost pleasure in most American families. It was hard saying goodbye, especially knowing the uncertainty of their future, but they are a strong people with a fatalistic sense of humor, who have grinned and bore 1,000 years of oppression and remain undaunted by the tyrants of a dying mongrel empire. Sláinte, my friends. Since I have never learned to drive a Standard, which are the only rentals available in Europe, or so it seemed, Gail was the designated chauffeur as we drove through the towns. I'd have gotten us killed, and drove only on the highways when Gail would change the gears as I tried to manipulate the pedals all the way across Ireland to the beautiful towns of Galway. We stayed at a B&B overlooking the bay of the same name, a name so often referred to in Irish songs. Seeing Ireland was a dream I never thought would become a reality. Yet here I was. How lucky I felt to have a dream come true. I finally learned why Ireland is called the land of midnight sun. When I awoke after 12 o'clock one night, upon seeing the sun as bright as it would be at high noon, I thought the world was coming to an end. Gail simply laughed at the frantic joy I took in this seeming miracle of childlike discovery. Up until that point, Gail and I had only thought we'd seen Ireland, until for $30 apiece, a small Cessna plane flew us about 50 miles off the coast to the Irish Isles of Arran. There we beheld an ambience that took us back 500 years in time to a land of solitude, where in more recent times literary greats like Yeats and Lady Gregory would escape to do some of their best writing. We landed in the island of Inishmaan, atop a small mountain where a field of knee-high green grass acted as a landing strip. That by itself had Gail and I grinning in awe as we jumped down from the doorway to the plane, wondering where we would go from here. The pilot laughed and pointed to a narrow path that twisted its way down the small mountain to the fishing village below, where to our dismay we found that all the natural inhabitants spoke Gaelic, a dying language. Winding our way down with the cows and occasional goats that shared our path, we gaped in silent wonder at the stone houses and their straw-thatched roofs that must have dated back to the 16th and 17th centuries. We waved excitedly to the leather-faced people with calloused hands, whose woolen clothes bespoke of poorness of peasants that I had only read about. They were a people who subsisted on what they could glean from a too often cruel sea, and the pittance the handful of life's ignorant travelers brought their way. My instincts told me that the majority of these people would rather do without the few extra dollars than have the serenity of their placid lives disturbed. My God, I thought, the sheer ignorant innocence of their human decency blew my mind. There were no TVs or radios, couldn't understand the English language if they had them. What would their reaction if I could relay the life of my progressive society where drugs, muggers, pimps, prostitutes, and the racial hatreds of fellow human beings runs rampant, and where the media and the silver screen people make billions while destroying the oppressive society they live in, and which I am a product of, a willing participant in aiding this once great country's downfall with my own brand of domestic terrorism, something I'm sure we all live to regret when total chaos and anarchy rule supreme, as it sadly shall. Have these people ever locked their doors in fear of their neighbor robbing and killing them, or raping their wife, daughter, and wheelchair-bound mothers? Do they greet each other on the street with, "What's happening, motherfucker?" Is this gentle salutation a word they even comprehend, no less incorporate into their language? I have come too far to change, good people. But God, how I wish the world could be more like you. It is dying, and I am dying. How lucky you are not to be participants or witnesses to its ungodly degradation.